I'm literally in awe of Frank Smith. He's someone who can do anything he puts his mind to do.
It took quite a few years into my life to realize that it's individual freedom what creates almost everything that improves our lives.
I do see a common thread between TowHaul, Music Ranch, and Reconnecting Roots. This is how Frank builds things. When there's a few fundamental pieces that fit together, then you know you can start and it will be successful. And that's kind of what he's taught me.
I just wanted to build things even as a little kid. I was probably about 4 or 5, and we lived in a homestead environment, so it was a very basic environment. So we never really had new nails. So one day I got a bee in my bonnet, I'm going to build a car. Had my sister help me, dragged the barn door out, then there was 4 old car wheels from somewhere, and we dragged those out to the corners of the barn door. We had an old 1-cylinder engine. We dragged that over and set it on. When I went to put it together, I had to straighten some nails to do that. You have to nail a car together, obviously. And I found that my fingers weren't strong enough to hold the bent nail to straighten it. So I can remember almost thinking, well, I got to give up on building a car till I'm older.
Frank's early interest in building things was accelerated by his life on the family homestead in British Columbia. It was the problem-solving attitude and work-with-what-you've-got mentality that set the foundation for his eventual career.
The haying equipment that you see now that's just produced in great quantities and doing all the work, that was just evolving. So the farmers, including us, were developing things to handle bales of hay and all of that. Fairly early on, my dad got me a welding machine, a cutting torch, and most of the things that we thought about and put together worked. It was the environment we lived in, we had to do it. And if something broke down, you would be figuring out basically how to fix it, because it wasn't common to be going to a big equipment dealer and ordering a bunch of parts. You looked at it and figured out how to fix it or how to rebuild it so it didn't break again. Having lived and worked through all of those things, I could relate to the people in the industry, whether it was the forest industry, trucking, or even mining.
Frank's experiences around the farm and family sawmill helped encourage his passion for trucks. Shortly after high school and a stint in the Royal Canadian Air Force, Frank began his career in trucking at Revelstoke.
This truck here is a 1957, and I've got it rigged up with logs. But here, this is a picture of a 1958. It's basically the same truck as a logger. By the time you got to 1956, 57, 58, even with Ford, you were up into full over-the-road size. If you bought one of these trucks new back then, you were kind of at the top of your game. There was a sawmill there in the front yard, a reasonable sized one. It had about 4 or 5 men in it, and the trucks would come in and they'd load them either during the day while they're sawing, or the lumber would go on, we called them horses. The truck would back under them and take them away. And I just loved those trucks. And then I worked from high school. I worked really 8 years before I went to engineering school, and most of that was trucking in the whole range. It was a little like ice road truckers in a way, but it was really, if you called it snow road truckers, because we were in a high snow belt area, and it was tough trucking. Just you had to work every minute of every day to putting chains on and off just to keep going. The sawmills would run for maybe a year, then they'd close due to logging or lumber markets or something, so it was just too unstable. And I was hardly ever out of work for more than about a day, but there's still a lot of gaps in there, and a lot of time was taking jobs that were not very well paying. One day I just came home and said, well, I've hauled my last load of logs. I'm going to get an education. So my sister told me, well, there's BC Institute of Technology right in Vancouver area. And so as I went through the catalog of all these different things, and one was mechanical engineering design option. When I came to that one, I pretty much probably said right out, well, I can do this. And that was 8 years after I got out of high school. That's quite a long time. I guess somebody could say, well, you were kind of a slow learner to take that long before you went to school. I graduated in '69, and the first job I went to was actually as a management trainee for a large logging division that had a lot of equipment. Dozens of cats and log loaders, and they had about 30 great big trucks. And so they had all that equipment, but I was a supervisor helping to manage the crews of welders and all that were maintaining that. I left that job voluntarily after about 2 years because I was not using my engineering. I used it 2 times out of 2 years. So I just said to myself and to my wife, if I don't use my engineering, I'm going to lose it because you forget it. We looked in the Vancouver paper, and Willock Truck Equipment Manufacturer was wanting people to apply for jobs. And so I said, well, that's be a good job for me. So when I came to be interviewed and taken through the shop, I basically knew almost everything about everything I was looking at. A year later or something, I maybe asked the chief engineer, why did you hire me? And he said, well, out of all the applicants, you were the only one who knew what a kingpin was, which is the one that hooks the truck to a trailer. So that's the real world. Then my former boss, he came to me one day in Vancouver and said, I want to have lunch with you. He said, our industry needs a better spreader for our industry. You're going to design it. McMillan Bodell, which is the company he worked for, said is going to buy it, and Willock's going to build it. I firstly said, I don't know anything about spreaders. I don't know how fast the disc should turn. I know nothing about them. He said, you'll figure all that out. So he had good confidence in me, and so I started doing some work on it. And a week or 2 later, called Andy Anderson back and said, here's what we believe will work for your criteria. So that was the first spreader, and it was successful. I was the inventor of it. It had novel features, so that was my first patent. The next season, I was still working at Willock. We sold 7 more. So I went into one of the owners of Willock and said, I think we should, here at Willock, get a little more organization to our sand spreaders. Well, he said, we've talked about it and we think we've saturated the market. Fairly soon after that, I started my own company, and in the next 10 years, we built 160.
After the initial success of the sand spreader, Frank created his own company, Smith Sanders Limited, beginning his foray into business and leading to opportunities with other trucking and mining equipment.
Within months, I had an order for a spreader for a mine up in northern BC. Then we evolved into other things too. So one mine actually in Montana had made a listing on the salesman sheet that they were going to be buying a lowboy trailer to haul mining machinery. But they didn't know if we could build it because they had this little Caterpillar tractor. It was about a 50-ton unit. He said, can you make a trailer to hook to that? Because none of the trailer manufacturers want to touch it. I said, oh, we can make a trailer with a gooseneck to hook to anything. Anything with wheels that you want to pull it. So I said, send me the specs on it. Then I forwarded him pictures and drawings of the ones we had just done with its custom gooseneck to fit the logging truck. So he was just overjoyed. And within about a month, he ordered 2. That was our first 2 mining trailers. Simply because it wasn't in the skill set of all the trailer manufacturers to make a gooseneck that would hook to something other than an over-the-road truck.
In 1986, Frank set up operations in Montana as Smith Equipment USA and began manufacturing his own equipment in Belgrade, where the business still resides today.
Because that's one thing that I had to come up with years ago in the 70s. Because this turntable, even though that's only relatively narrow, it's inherently stable. The single point is inherently unstable, so as soon as it tips from the side, your whole trailer starts to go. And it is, even though it's only that narrow, it's very important to the stability of the trailer. So if you ever hear a move to a single point, give me a call.
All right, it's a deal.
I sang all the time since I was a kid. When I walked to school, we walked a couple of miles, I'd sang out on the tractors. Didn't realize till 10 or 15 years later that people could hear me for 2 miles away. All the neighbors would hear me singing on the tractor. When I got 18, got out of high school, went to work for my dad then in the sawmill. And my first 2 paychecks, one of them I bought a toolkit, and the other one I bought a tape recorder, so I could record myself and see if I sounded any good. It was fairly evident that the toolkit dominated my career. However, the interest was always there, and I eventually learned to play guitar.
Frank's interest in music converged with that of his wife Karen's childhood experiences. She grew up in nearby Bridger Canyon at a barn built by her grandfather, a Norwegian immigrant. Family and friends from the community would gather to play music and dance in the upstairs dance hall.
We had pie socials, box socials, dancing. My dad called square dances, just anything that the community wanted to do. My dad was a very giving person and also wanted to have something available for anyone that wanted a place to go and do things as a family.
There's a little tie-in to this because I'm not sure how many people in this room have heard of Music Ranch that's over in Paradise Valley. Some anyway. When I met Karen 20 years ago, that's when the idea for Music Ranch came about. I had had it for about a year, the idea, and a skeleton building that wasn't set up yet. I met Karen, and then very quickly we started to talk about, she started talking about this dance hall that her folks had above his shop in Bridger. She could hardly believe that I was interested in community music, and I could hardly believe that she had grown up that way. So we worked away together to create Music Ranch.
I was in the house and I found a box of reel-to-reel tapes, and I started digging through them and playing them on a little cassette. I liked what he was doing, so I started dubbing them off. I was going to hand them out to let people know that he sings, because he didn't tell anybody he was a singer. He was a closet singer, and he only sang kind of to himself until I came along. So I dubbed off 100 of these on a little reel-to-reel with 17 songs on them, and he said, "You can't do that." He says, "Some of them aren't finished." He said, "They're not in tune. Some of them I'm just not finished." He said, "You can't do that." I said, "Well, I did it." So I handed them out, and people loved it.
Then later on he'd find the times had changed, and his life and its demands were rearranged. The grandsons following later on would see a different man than had been there for me. Because boys who are sons become fathers, and then the grandsons are grown, and it all starts again. And each one in turn sees a new side of him as his dreams are reborn from the boy through the man. So we built the first Music Ranch building. It was a 24 by 60 foot building. The very most people could have in it was about 180. You couldn't accommodate enough people to be able to afford to bring in name entertainers. So essentially, between Karen and I, we've reached the conclusion that it had to be bigger.
Frank and Karen's dream of Music Ranch, Montana resonated with the community. After outgrowing the facilities in Belgrade, Music Ranch relocated to his property in Paradise Valley. The venture would prove to be another example of Frank putting the needs of his community above profit when it comes to his business.
If you're teaching business class, and it wouldn't matter to me where it was, a big university or whatever, they're looking strictly as a business. And so they're looking at it can't survive unless it's making a profit. My answer to that professor, because remember, I was an adult student, I was used to talking to people, so it didn't bother me to just say, well, I don't agree with that. The term business is tied that there must be a profit involved here. And if there's a profit, somebody's possibly being taken advantage of. I think that's a very, very inaccurate view of what the real business world is about. The real business world is about creating something of value that people want. I used the example, I said Henry Ford didn't start building cars because he wanted to make a profit. He started building cars because he thought people would want cars and that people could use cars. And then ultimately you make a profit in order to keep your enterprise going. It doesn't take long till if you've got something good that's needed, they begin to depend on it. So that's when your responsibility kicks in.
As his own company grew, the chance to creatively explore the needs of the marketplace became obvious. With the help of his stepdaughter, Kim Wilde, the company began to expand its footprint in the market.
It took me a while to realize that the mining operations, the mining supervisors and managers were really quite grateful to find somebody that was prepared to tackle their problem. And that's very personal to me, because the years that I was operating or driving trucks or operating other machinery, it's very, very bothersome when it's not operating properly or is difficult to use or breaks down. Whenever I designed anything, and I'm thinking not only how will it work on a nice day, but how will it work for the operator hooking it up at 2 a.m. in a snowstorm. I never did lose that in my own personal engineering.
I am one of the luckiest people ever to be able to have gone through the Frank Smith School of Business. I think other than the fundamental management traits, one of the most important management traits Frank has taught me is his honest respect for the customer and our employees. He really, really looks at the needs. He puts himself in their shoes and he designs around that.
So as I got to know the mining world, they recognized that we could do creative things. They needed a means to tow broken down trucks. One superintendent once told me that back in those years, if a haul truck was broke down, it would generally sit for 2 days in the mine before they could get it to the shop. And once they got it to the shop, they'd use a combination of other haul trucks, bulldozers, and everything you could think of to move it there. And by the time they got it to the shop, they'd done more damage than was wrong with it to start. And it was through one particular mine that wanted a tow hook, and they also wanted a lowboy, and they had, as usual, a somewhat limited amount of money they wanted to spend. So you just kept pushing me. You got to figure this out. We've only got a 100-ton truck available. We want to haul 230 tons. We want to also build a tow. I was just one day at my drawing board looking, and I said, why can't the tow hook and the gooseneck be the same piece of machinery? And so at that point it was, how do I hook that gooseneck or gooseneck tow hook to the front of the trailer? To get there, I had to invent the grab hook.
That was the ticket for the rest of the design. The mines jumped on the idea. They saw the power of that invention for them in their minds. When you really listen like that, you find what their real problems are. And so he dives in and tries to solve them, and in this case, he sure hit the jackpot.
I basically knew that we had a product that was marketable. And so within a few days, I just thought, we're going to get a name for this company that suits this product. I came up with TowHaul. I ended up going through a 4-step process, virtually always. What does this product need to do? What's it going to accomplish when it's out there working? The second thing, how can I engineer it to make it do that? Then the third part that almost was the most fun for me is how are we going to build it? How will we manufacture it? I think, and when you go through TowHaul, you see it looks fairly easy, but it's easy because it's been really thought out and perfected. And the fourth step is what will it look like? Because customers like a machine that looks good.
The patented tow hook design proved to be a tremendous success for Frank and TowHaul, creating steady growth within the mining market for years to come. While Frank's innovations fueled TowHaul's success, the growth continued thanks to his unique business wisdom and the marketing leadership of Kim Wilde.
The company grew under the guidance of my daughter Kim. She loved marketing and she'd been in banking. She wanted a part-time job. So TowHaul, or Smith Equipment, which became TowHaul, was already 7 years old when she came in, and she just really latched onto the product and wanted to market it more broadly than I was.
The first thing that comes to my mind when I think of what one of the things that Frank taught me was that we can do anything if we do it in phases. And I've learned to have that faith in the just build it approach that he has to some things. As long as certain fundamental pieces are in place, then it's going to be successful. Takes some guts to go forward sometimes.
A friend of mine and I came on weekends and built the basic steel. Then a builder friend of ours we contracted to come and close it in. And then I guess the creative idea, maybe other shops do it too, was running this beam right through it from end to end so we could stack the plates and then just run them in and out. It's much more like a sawmill activity than it is a normal manufacturing facility. So I think that has proved to be a good asset for this company.
He's taught me that, our employees are the most important part of the puzzle to our company. And I've always agreed with that.
One of the cliches of business is the customer comes first, and the customer is always right, no matter what. It's not the customer comes first, it's the employees come first. If you have a business or an enterprise, if you look after your employees will look after the customer. So that's looking after the customer is a result, not your primary goal of it.
There's a quality that Frank has to see, not the big picture, but the really big picture. I've always told people that he is about 10 years ahead of his time. That's been a huge driver in the growth of TowHaul.
The future for TowHaul that I think, clearer now, I see it passing on through generations. We've got a lot of families where there's 2 or 3 family members working at TowHaul. 50 years from now, I think we'll see TowHaul there. The success of TowHaul allowed the development of Music Ranch, but it started just from nothing too, and it started in a building on the TowHaul land. Really, when I met Karen, I realized that in my retirement years, as I was phasing out, I could spool the other one up. But it wasn't so much for me, but I felt that there's lots of people love to listen to music, and a lot of them love to play, and a lot of people write songs.
It was also built with a multi-purpose function in mind, and if you notice, Music Ranch is built just right so that we could put a 220-ton cranes in here if needed, and start building lowboy trailers if we needed a backup. So he's always thinking multi-purpose, always thinking phases, and really has a brilliant strategy when he goes to design anything.
In my guitar's Cadillac, hillbilly and music, lonely, lonely streets that I got home.
We have dances, I would say, mainly because of the community aspect of it. It's a tradition, I think, in the country that goes back a long way, and then somehow or another it evolved to the point where the dancing was largely in bars. So with Music Ranch, we wanted to get an environment that was a family environment for the dance. In a family environment with the kids running around out on the hill. Pretty well the same as when Karen grew up.
It brings back wonderful, wonderful memories of a time growing up that was very special to me. Music Ranch, Montana has become everything I hoped for. And what I'm seeing is that the community around here and everyone that's been here is loving it. And we hope to get better and better every year.
I use the term enterprise because I wanted a replacement for business. And so the definition of enterprise is something undertaken, a project, mission, business, etc. So all of those are an enterprise. The enterprises that I'm involved with, now this for a big part of my life, the fact that they can be deemed a business is a small part of the ingredient. Once it gets rolling, figure out a way to make it either pay for itself so you can break even or so it does make some extra money. Now, when I moved to the United States, I got acquainted with the U.S. Constitution. So as I read the U.S. Constitution, really the motivation of America was to guarantee individual freedom. That's the driving motivation that I have is individual freedom. You don't know what's going to come from an individual that's more or less liberated and set free.
Upon retirement, Frank spent years reflecting on his experiences with TowHaul and Music Ranch. He put his ideas together into a short book that contained his understanding of what allowed America to progress so rapidly since the mid-1800s. The fundamental ideas of freedom, creativity, and individual responsibility. The ideas behind this book eventually became a nationally broadcast PBS series that debuted in July of 2019.
Full title of my little book, which ended up to be 17 pages long, was The Greatness of America, which is really a direct descendant of individual freedom. And then it was just a mechanism for me to write it. The subtitle of Facts in My Opinion allowed me to write it without having to defend my statements. I could just simply make a statement, this is this and this, and I didn't need to write a huge long book with a 5-page bibliography. I could just state it as a fact and people could take it or leave it. I do believe that the fundamental conclusion of the greatness of America, it's because of individual freedom and the individual freedom and the creativity that comes from it. And I'm in awe of the founding fathers and mothers of the country that put that all together. So portraying that into a medium that would go out on like a television show, I think it was kind of a natural thought process.
The resulting TV series, Reconnecting Roots, airs on PBS across the nation and is executive produced by Frank and Karen Smith.
What I want to see on the screen is essentially the way we were, the way we are now, and how we got here. In my view, how we got here is really the connection of the roots. The oldest generations don't understand the young generation very well, and the young don't understand the old one. But there's way more common ground in there than a person realizes, and that comes to the overlapping generations. My main thing that I'd like them to take with them is 1, 2, or even 3 thoughts that I had no idea that my grandparents or my great-grandparents went through that situation in their lives and in the era in which they lived. Really, I'm going through that now in my own life, trying to figure out what to do, and I just didn't realize that my grandfather went through maybe the same thing. Usually, the part I love about it, which is kind of the generating impulse for the show, is some individual comes up with a creative concept that allows that particular subject to move forward and become important to another generation. As, say, the development of the lowboy trailer, which the particular configuration, which is the basis of TowHaul, even the name of it, the individual creativity that I was empowered to use was instrumental in that happening. And if every so often there's an individual sees it and thinks, you know, I was thinking of doing this or that, but I couldn't see how or why it would be important, go out and start doing it. You don't know where it's going to lead to. It's a quote by Thoreau, "Go confidently in the direction of your dreams, live the life you have imagined."